Hello and welcome to another edition of Resources for Life TV at resourcesforlife.com. My name's Greg Johnson, and this is a brief video response to an email that just arrived moments ago. I'll read you an excerpt from that email. In fact, this is what sort of prompted this video. The person writes, "Democracy is a failed experiment. Representative democracy is a failed experiment." That's essentially what they're saying. I was just stopped in my tracks when I read that. I have been this last week dealing with an online community in which we needed to come to a democratic decision that would impact the entire online community. And through this process, I began to lose my faith in the democratic process of representative, cooperative, collaborative decision-making and governance. Because ultimately what happened was the majority decided, and I'll say right out, I was part of the majority, but we decided, and we were wrong, really. And so the decision was simple. It was a matter of, do we want to have separate subgroups to talk about topics of interest, or do we want everything to just kind of flood into this one online discussion area? And the decision was, let the floodgates open, let all the discussion topics fall under one category heading. And so there were some people, a minority, but some people who said, look, that's just ineffective, it's not desirable, it's overwhelming, with just kind of hundreds of emails on every topic under the sun, somewhat related to, this is a small house discussion group. So I was one of the people who was part of the the majority who said, yeah, let just everything come along, let's not try to censor or create subgroups, let's just let it go. But what I realized was that the decision of the majority would have such a large impact on the minority that it really didn't quite seem fair, that this majority of the group was just going to impose their view on the minority. Well, that's how democracy works. And what I realized was, well, I don't think that's right, because here's this smaller group of people that was going to end up getting a lot of emails they didn't really want to get. Some of these, I think, would just decide to leave the group because they felt it just wasn't functioning the way they wanted it to. So anyway, I had this sense that, democracy doesn't always function properly, especially when the majority who rule, and the majority opinion, when the majority of people, either by number or by power, because as we all know, sometimes the majority of power doesn't always rest in the largest number of people. It might just be a handful of people with a lot of money and a lot of influence. When they impose their views and their desires on a large group of others, that's not right. It's not fair, and it doesn't produce the best results. Similarly, another way in which the majority can be wrong, you could have 51% of the people who are wrong, flat out wrong. The way this can happen is if they've been manipulated by the media or by the power brokers. You can take a small group of people, 1/10 of 1%, who can go out and put out a lot of advertising or spin in the news or whatever, and significantly influence public opinion. So that's another way in which, what appears to be democracy really isn't. And we, of course, here I am in North America, in the U.S., we think in terms of black and white, yes or no, Republican, Democrat, blue states, red states, that there's no in between, there's no gray. And whenever votes are made on certain issues, it's quite often, proposition whatever, do you agree or disagree? There's never like, you don't submit an essay answer to that question. It's like, draw with your pencil in dot A or dot B. We've reduced our political system to the same sort of kind of public survey as we have in a simple high school exam, where you're not allowed to really think through something or express yourself, but just simply state yes or no. Well, in other countries, it's a little more complicated. You don't just have Republicans and Democrats. It's not just yes or no on certain topics and issues. You might have, let's just as an example, say that there were 4 parties who were almost equally represented. Okay, we've had a little bit of that here in the U.S. with, say, the Green Party and Libertarians. But let's say there was an election, and in that election, a very important vote needed to be cast on a certain issue, and that issue was so divisive and so important that each party, in fact, was going to have a specific view on how they wanted this issue handled. So there are these 4 groups, and let's say it was broken down into almost 25%, 25%, 23%, and then somebody else was 27%. So this 27% group who won democratically would pull the rest, almost 75% of everybody down, and they would get their way. I think that's a little more of a dramatic depiction of what democracy can do when it fails. But anyway, I think my primary concern, and I'd love to have some feedback on this, is what do we do when the majority's wrong? And it's not always a 51% majority. It could be like 80% of the people could be wrong, What do we do when that happens? And how do we have checks and balances for that? I think the primary problem with democracy isn't inherent in democracy itself, but it's like a vehicle needs to run on gasoline. Democracy only runs on the fuel of independent thinking, a well-educated populace, and freedom, and a freedom of the press. Well, we don't have a lot of that right now. We don't really have true freedom of the press. We have very narrow views represented in radio talk shows and on TV. Our educational system is foundering, is collapsing. We're putting more and more money into defense and less money into just kind of education, basically. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but I'd really like to get some feedback. So thank you to the person who wrote and questioned, is democracy, representative democracy, a failed experiment or not? We'll see what other people think. We'll take a poll. All right, take care.